session. We have Martin with us. Welcome. It's very nice to have you here. And without any further ado, I'll let you get into your session.
Excellent, thank you. So first of all, thanks for having me. Thanks. I think you asked the question earlier, how many recaps did everybody attend? I think this is number 4 for me. I couldn't attend last year because it was scheduled a little weirdly, but anyways, good to see you all. Great to have such a big audience here. What I want to talk about today is the use of plugins, not just for what plugins are, I think, mainly used for today, which is sort of the technology aspect, but really look at it at plugins from a data model perspective, and how do you split up your applications, especially reusable parts of your applications, into plugins. So what I want to do is, I want to give you the background of, how did I even come up with this stuff? And then also tie it back to some of the things that actually Daniel was talking about in his keynote, data products. Because if you're looking at what I've done here, it's essentially, SAP would call it a data product development, in my opinion. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So in order also to stick with the theme of early recaps, where we said, okay, no PowerPoint, I decided that I forgo all PowerPoint slides and just put it into a GitHub repo. So if you're looking for anything, example code, or essentially the bottom text of what I'm trying to tell you, you can find it under Alpha Oak reCAP Conference 2025, and that's kind of where you find all the things. So let me give you a little bit of background of how did I get to this point? How did I decide to use plugins for the business logic? So we are mainly working in sort of the intersection of what I call enterprise asset management or plant maintenance and the utility companies. So big utility companies that are having lots of power poles in the field, et cetera, et cetera. They have some standard KPIs that they always want to report out on. A lot of those KPIs are probably common to you as well. Quality, safety, schedule compliance, et cetera, et cetera. We at Alpha Oak have a certain idea as in how should you calculate that. So that's a very opinionated approach, which sort of lines up with what CAP is as well, as an opinionated product. But when you're thinking about it, how do I calculate KPIs? The standard answer from SAP is usually, hey, just use SAC or Business Data Cloud, and you just do some queries, and whoop-de-doo, you have a dashboard, and everything is fine. That is great, and usually I subscribe to that as well. But the reality looks slightly different. The reality is that some of the data you get from an external system. Some of the data is not even there and is going to be entered on an ongoing basis into something. Now what you find out very quickly is that most of the analytics offering from SAP does not have any standard Fiori apps to allow you to enter information into a data model. So that's sort of the starting point that I had, where I said, okay, ultimately, yes, I want to have calculation views that can report out on stuff, but in order to get there, I need to have additional data sets that people can enter manually. But then I also have the classic thing that we all know and love about SAP, configurability. So what and when is my KPI indicator turning green? Is it at 70%? Is it at 85%? So that's sort of the flexibility I wanted to be able to have. So when you're thinking about that, you then come up with, okay, I need the data, obviously. I need sort of the data model. I need replicated data. So Mike, that had the presentation before me, sort of touched on data replication and data pull from SAP. That's a whole other topic. And I'm not going into that right now. But what I started out with, okay, I need to have a data model, a central data model that I can sort of build and dovetail into. Now, as a company, because we're always focusing on maintenance data, for me, I start always with a data model that is maintenance related. So I have certain entities that every application I build, I use them. So then I got to the point where with the new technologies in CAP, it's like, why do I not put the data model into a plugin? And that's really what I want to show you today. So a few other things that I want to show you here, system landscape. So use the wonderful SAP system architecture diagram stencils here. So essentially, at the end of the day, it's a Cloud Foundry app with a HANA Cloud database. Uses the HTML5 app repository to store the Fiori apps. That's a whole other story that we'll, if we have time, we'll talk about. But other than that, it has 2 consumer sides at the moment. It's the business or the work zone front end that has analytical Fiori apps to report out the results, but also regular Fiori apps to enter stuff. And then you have SAP Analytics Cloud as sort of the standard front end that managers, senior executives of the company want to use. So this is what I wanted to show you. This is my dependency tree. Yeah? So what you see here is that I'm not just having one component or one app that makes up what I call Sigma. Yeah? Sigma is made up of multiple dependent packages. And at the end of the day, they're plugins in the CAP description, but they're also Node.js packages. Yeah? They're deployed on NPM. I can pull them in, but I can work them individually. So I don't have to have the big project open and sort of work on everything else. And they're versioned independently. So I can version them off, and I can then decide when I want to pull the new versions in. So all the things that you get, all the benefits that you're getting from the classic NPM packaging. But what you see here is that the EM core package is sort of my central piece that I will always use. For every app that I'm writing, EM core is sort of my go-to starting point because it has the basic data model of all the 16 tables that I always need. I never have to sort of go back to the drawing board and saying, let me copy and paste that into yet another project. That's my central thing. And if I extend or enhance that data model, it continuously updates all my applications that I build on top of that. You see a few things underneath it, but what I wanted to go through with you is sort of the additions on top. So I have a simple scenario here where I show you something that looks a little bit like EM core, and then put EM safety on top of it, just to show you how do you take a standard data model and then extend it, or optionally add stuff to it in the application or in a higher level plugin. So that's the part that I want to walk through with you here today. By the way, let me ask a few questions here. Who has used plugins before? Quite a few, that's good. Who has used plugins to actually model data models, not just technology? Okay, that's kind of where we lose the crowd. Good, excellent. Then I'll show you something maybe a little bit new. So let's go into our Visual Studio Code. What I've done here is I've sort of started the setup, given that I have 13 minutes left, and I've probably content for 2 days, but that's how it always works. So what I'm showing you here is, first of all, the plugin and the app in the same project. So let me shut this or close this up. So what you see here is, and this is the best practice that the CAP team themselves are using in order to develop these kinds of components. So you have the app, you have the plugin, and then you use a standard node mechanism that is called workspaces in order to tie these two together. So you don't need to deploy a package in order to re-import it. The sample app has direct access to what's in sample plugin. So what am I doing in sample app in order to get access to my plugin? I have to just reference it. So here you see the Alpha Oak reCAP plugin version 1 reference, and that is an important part. So if you don't do that, your application or your plugin that relies on this other plugin does not have visibility to it. So let's go into the plugin real quick and show you what I have in there. Let me also run it, and I'll show you that in a minute. So the plugin, I super simplified just in order to get it across in this session. The first thing that you need to keep an eye out is your name, your package name. So the package name is relevant because, as I said, on the consumption side, you need to specify that in the reference section in order to get your plugin in. The second thing that is important is you have to have a file called cdsplugin.js in the root directory. So that's what I always do. And what I usually do is I just put a little info message in here that it says plugin loaded. Usually I put that on debug just in order to make sure that I can easily figure out, well, is the plugin even loading or not? Or is there something that I'm missing, especially in the early days of development? And then what I've done here for this conference is I've created a super simple data model. There's one entity in there that's called jobs. You see it in the namespace reCAP. And then there's another service that I call the API service. That's another concept that I would love to get your feedback on as to how you are separating out sort of what I always call the API level from the user interface level. A lot of people sort of just cram it together and saying, I put all the annotations just into my service. For me, I want to have this abstraction. I want to have an API service, and then what I do is I put another that I call user interface service on top of the API service that then has, for example, a Fiori draft annotation, et cetera, to separate it out. Because I have things like criticality indicators, which you don't care about in the API usually. You care very much about in the user interface. You have some other queries that you're doing just for the user interface, and I want to separate that out from each other. So that's my starting point. So I have an API service, I have my jobs entity, and what I can do here is I can, in the plugin, just run it, and it would come up. So let's not spend too much time on that. What we really want to do is we want to go into the sample app, and as you see here in my sample app, I don't have anything. I have data, out of whatever reason, my directories disappeared here. This is a new one, but we'll fix that one in a minute. And the thing that I want to do here is start up with essentially my data model. So in my case, I will just call it AppDB model CDS. And in order to now get access to my plugin information, my data model in the plugin, what I have to do is I have to put the using statement in. Before I do that, though, let me start a CDS watch. In the wrong directory, obviously. Hang on. So switching to the sample app directory, running CDS watch, what I should see is that I don't see anything. So there's nothing coming up. At the moment, I have not triggered the plugin, or it's not requesting, or it's not exposing the API service yet. Why is that? Well, because I've essentially managed to do one thing of two things necessary. One is, you see the import in the package.json that I imported the plugin, but I haven't used it anywhere. So CAP is smart enough to say, hey, I don't have to start this up because it's not used anywhere. So what I'm doing here, I now specify that I want to use my AO reCAP namespace from, and now doing add alpha or reCAP plugin. So let me save that. And what you immediately see is that a few things happen. You see down here that my reCAP plugin loaded, so that message that I put in there for myself to indicate whether or not the plugin was loaded kicked in. Good news, that means it's coming up. The other good news is that you see here is the API service is exposed, even though in my application itself I haven't done anything. I haven't done any data model definition, I haven't done any service definition. Whatever you have in the plugin suddenly immediately comes up and is exposed. So again, that's up to you to define whether or not you want to just use plugins for data model definition or also for service definition. For me, the API service is a common thing. I always use the API service and I want to use that. So what I usually do then is a few more things. So I usually have another entity in here. Let's call it the entity, let's call it service inspections. Let's go with what is suggested here. The other piece that I want to do, and this is sort of so ID, I'll stick with integer, service ID. Let's change this a little bit. Why is it thinking that everything has to be a key? So this is GitHub Copilot for you, by the way. Sometimes good, sometimes a little strange as it what's come up with, but that's fine. So the other thing that I want to put in here into my main entity is a joining field. And the joining field in my case might be the SAP work order ID. What you see here, though, is that the SAP work order ID, in my case, is not necessarily a key field, it's just another field. So here I have the service inspection, and I will just leave it with that. So now I have a new entity, it's not exposed anywhere, but what I really want to do, and this is sort of where it gets really interesting, I want to extend my reCAP jobs entity with a service inspection that is actually an association to service inspection, and then to actually many service inspections. let's make this approval here. And then I can specify what the joining criteria is. So for this one, it is the work order, SAP work order ID, that's what I'm looking for, to self SAP work order ID. There we go. Service inspections. So now what I've done is I've extended my original jobs entity with the entity that is in the application. And this is how I modeled, let's go back to this overview chart here. Nope, a little bit higher. This is how I modeled these quality assurance things. So whenever I import quality assurance, the standard model of jobs is now extended by details for the quality assurance, but also by the association that I have from jobs to the details of quality assurance. So my jobs entity essentially grows. Yeah? It grows with associations that are now put in. And depending on the business use case of what I want to expose and how big the application is, as I said, jobs is always my centerpiece, and everything else is tagging on to that. Unfortunately, I'm down to 4 minutes, so I want to give you 2 or 3 other things that I ran into that are actually interesting that you should start thinking about. Once you are building these plugins that are now having a business context, what I got to is that I not only want to have the data model for that plugin, for that section of the module in that plugin, but I also now built my Fiori app that is specific to that entity that I put into the plugin itself. Now, what you get to then is that you have Fiori apps hanging in imported modules. That's not something that a standard BTP deployment strategy actually works with. So what I put into this repo as well is what I have done in order to solve for that. The solution that I used is I create essentially a representative directory in my main project or my main application directory, and then reference the Fiori app that is hanging in the plugin, that is essentially showing up in the Node modules folder. But what you need to do is, in order to build all of that, you need to tie it together. And the only way that I found is symlinks. So once you're getting down to that point, either look into this documentation or send me an email. I'm happy to sort of give you guidance as well as share the little tool that I wrote in order to work around those things. So that's the second thing. And then the last thing is multi-language support that I didn't struggle with, but I think we can do better there. For me, the starting point is always every text that is descriptive should be multi-language. But nobody is really forcing you down this road right now. So what I've done is I wrote a little tool that looks at the combined CSN structure, the compiled CSN structure, and then goes through it and analyzes what is really textual, and is it already represented by an I18N placeholder? And then secondarily, is that I18N placeholder in my I18N language files, yes or no? If either one of those two are not true, it will automatically replace it with an I18N placeholder and also put a sort of a starting point of a text into my file. So that's what I need for standard application development, just in order to make sure is that I don't have to manually crawl through all the codes and all the files in order to do that. So with that, I have 1 minute left. Any questions? Anybody? There's a question. I think we have time for one question, correct? Up here.
Right here.
Turn it on? Is it works?
Perfect.
The plugin is now part of the mono repo, I think, because you have the application and the plugin combined. Would it also be possible if the plugins were in separate repos or even separately deployed?
Yes. So what I usually do is I don't develop like this. I usually develop every plugin in its own repo, and then what I do is I have a service.js that figures out itself whether or not it's development mode or production mode. Because in development mode, I want it to act as if it's just another app. In a production mode, though, I want it to be essentially the plugin version when it's called from somebody else. So I've done that, but to answer your question, I usually separate plugins into individual repos, and I don't have the structure and I don't use the structure. I've found other ways to test it just as well. Cool. So if you have any questions, I will be around. Other than that, you can find me at, well, through various LinkedIn connections. And my email is martin@stenzig.com. That's my private one. There's also a business one. Thanks for your attention. Have a great day and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Martin.